Hello everyone and welcome to another episode. Before I start this week's episode, I just want to take an opportunity to thank everybody for watching last week's episode and giving your feedback. I really appreciate it, and I'm hoping that I can incorporate all the criticisms and the comments that you guys had and hopefully make these videos better as we go along. The number one critique that I received was obviously that I need to look more directly into the camera as I speak, so I'm going to try not to look at my notes as much. And number two was that I need to do something about my graying beard. That unfortunately there is not much I can do about. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, the topic I want to talk about today is something that has been discussed over long periods of time. For centuries, lawyers, legal theorists have talked about this topic. And in fact, in the more recent past, it has become a topic of discussion among scholars, amongst average people. Everybody seems to be talking about this topic. And that topic is, does the law need to be moral? Now, as I told you last week, there are two opposing schools of thought on this, and today we're going to try and focus on the school of thought that promotes this idea, and that is natural law. What is natural law? Well, natural law is this idea that there is a universal, objective, immutable set of morals that govern this world, and that any law made by man, by any ruler which hopes to govern human beings, must satisfy those universal moral principles. Now, they may vary on what morality is. Different writers at different periods had different definitions of what morality was, but they all agreed that there was some universal morality that these human man-made laws must satisfy. This thinking can famously be traced back all the way to the ancient Greeks like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Socrates famously had these dialogues where he discussed what justice was. And at the end of this dialogue, he concluded that justice was what could be identified through man's reasoning power. In other words, he believed that every human being had the ability to identify what justice was. They were able to reason out what justice was. In other words, identify what was right and what was wrong. So there was a universal idea of what is right and what is wrong. And any man-made law that was passed needed to satisfy that threshold of right and wrong. There's a famous hypothetical law that is considered in jurisprudence, and that is a law which asks you to kill all blue-eyed babies. And the question is, should we follow that law? And natural lawyers like the Greeks would argue that we shouldn't, because it does not align with our natural reasoning power or that ultimate morality, that universal morality that exists. Now, as society evolved and organized religion started to become more widely practiced, and the concept of a singular God became more commonly adopted, there was a necessity for the idea of God to be reconciled with law. Because this idea that there was a universal natural morality that people can identify through their reasoning did not align with the concept of God. Therefore, writers like St. Thomas Aquinas tried to align these two so that God and law do not contradict each other. And how he did it was he recognized multiple types of law. He recognized one type of law called divine law. That was God's own knowledge that he made known to human beings through different means like the scriptures. Then he also recognized things like natural law. He believed natural law was the law that man identified through his reasoning, but that reasoning power was given to man by God, thus looping God into the narrative. So he recognized human law, and he said human law was law that had to satisfy either divine law or natural law. See, he uses this amazing example of an architect to explain this concept. He says an architect is free to decide the dimensions of the windows and doors that he places, the placement of those windows and doors that he places in a house. But the fact that he must have windows and doors is fixed. He has to have windows and doors. And this is similar to the job of a lawmaker. A lawmaker is free to decide on the nitty-gritties of the law, but there is a fixed aspect that he has to ensure, and that is that it satisfies this fundamental divine law or natural law principles. Now, centuries later, this connection of God and law started to become a little complex, because as societies became more pluralist, as the concept of God became a little more complex, and as some people started to question the idea of God itself, there was a necessity to detach God from law. So writers like Hugo Grotius attempted to do this. But they, of course, had to be careful. They didn't want to completely alienate God from law, but they also needed to detach God from the idea of law. So how they did it was they recognized that natural law was good and therefore God endorsed it. It wasn't that natural law became good simply because God endorsed it. So they identified that God would endorse natural law, but at the same time, natural law didn't become good because of the endorsement of God. Despite the efforts by these writers, natural law fell into decline in the 1700s and the 1800s. This was because of one severe criticism, and that is that there is no such thing as an objective morality. And that's kind of true if you think about it. Morality is something that varies from place to place, from situation to situation. What morality is to one person is different to what is morality to another person. So morality varies from culture to culture, from religion to religion, from social background to social background. So this was a valid question to ask of natural law. And if there was no such thing as an objective morality, it was dangerous to ask people to follow law based on this morality. Because different people will start to see the law differently and follow the law differently. During this time, another theory was in its ascendancy, and that is positivism. Positivism took the position that there was no need for any man-made law to satisfy a sense of morality. They believed that once a law is validly passed, it is law regardless of its morality. This was a much easier theory to understand and follow, and therefore it spread like wildfire, and even today, the basis for law is primarily positivism. But in the latter part of the 20th century, after the atrocities of the Second World War, there was a revival in natural law. That is because a lot of people felt that the atrocities of the Second World War would not have arisen if man-made law was held to a higher standard, if man-made law was forced to follow a higher threshold of morality. In the Nuremberg trials, these are the trials that took place after the Second World War, where the Nazi soldiers were brought to trial. One of the positions taken was that the Nazi soldiers should not have followed the Nazi laws because it did not satisfy a basic sense of morality. Of course, the answer that the soldiers would provide is that they were simply following the law that was passed. So, what do you think? Do you think there is a sense of universal morality? Do you think there's an objective standard of right and wrong? Do you think our parliaments should be forced to pass laws that are moral? Or do you think we should be asked to follow any law that our parliaments and rulers pass? Let me know in the comments and we can have a chat about it. But I think it is important for us as a society to talk about this topic because it is only then we can start to demand a higher level of accountability from our lawmakers to satisfy some basic sense of morality when they pass the law. Well, that's it for this episode. Please do consider subscribing if you like this kind of content and want to see more of this kind of content. You can also find these episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.